It began on a rain-swept night in late autumn, the kind of night when every streetlight looks like a question mark hanging in fog. At 2:47 a.m., deputies from the Grant County Sheriff's Office responded to a 911 call from the edge of town, a woman screaming that her husband was missing. When they arrived at the small parsonage behind First Hope Baptist, the door was unlocked, the kitchen light still on, and a half-finished sermon sat glowing on the pastor's laptop. Reverend Daniel Keller was gone. His wife, Miriam, met the officers barefoot on the porch, wrapped in a cardigan that clung to her like wet paper. She said Daniel had gone out for a drive to clear his head around midnight, something he did often after late-night counseling sessions. But this time, he never came back. His phone went straight to voicemail. The family's white Ford Crown Vic, the one he used for hospital visits, was missing. The deputies swept the gravel road behind the church, their flashlights slicing through mist. What they found, about a mile down by Miller Creek, stopped them cold. The Crown Vic nose down in the water, headlights still glowing beneath the current. The driver's door hung open. There was no sign of Daniel Keller. By sunrise, the story had spread across town. The pastor's car was found in the creek. The morning congregation gathered on the church steps, holding hands and praying. But as the sheriff's office pulled the car from the water, the hope that he had survived drained with the mud. No body, no footprints leaving the scene, just the smell of wet leaves and the uneasy sense that the pastor everyone trusted had simply evaporated. The official report would later describe it as a missing person under suspicious circumstances. But to the people of Ashwood, population 3,200, a farming town tucked between the Ozarks and nowhere, the case was something darker. Reverend Keller wasn't just a preacher. He was the glue holding the community together, officiating weddings, mediating disputes, organizing food drives. When he disappeared, the town's faith began to crack. Miriam insisted Daniel had been exhausted lately. Overworked, she said, but not unhappy. She told investigators he'd received some anonymous letters over the past few months. Threats, though she'd thrown them away. He said it was just small-town nonsense. That's what he called it. The deputies made notes, but didn't press. In rural counties, pastors receive all sorts of letters, from the grateful, the grieving, the unhinged. Then came the discovery that changed everything. 2 days later, a volunteer search team found a backpack caught in the reeds near the riverbank, a few hundred yards downstream. Inside were damp papers, sermon drafts, an empty wallet, and a leather-bound notebook labeled Ministry Accounts. The problem was, it wasn't the church's bookkeeping. It was a list of names, each with amounts beside them, 2,000, 4,000, 10,000, and at the bottom, a final line scrawled in hurried pen. M. Winters, 25K, urgent before December. The sheriff asked around. There was no M. Winters in Ashwood's congregation, but someone remembered an Melissa Winters, who'd once lived 30 miles south in Benton County. She'd attended Keller's church years ago before moving away. Her name hadn't been spoken in years, not since the night she was found dead behind the diner where she worked. Officially ruled an overdose. Unofficially, nobody believed it. The deeper investigators looked, the stranger the picture became. Credit card statements showed Daniel Keller had been renting a second apartment in Fayetteville, under the alias David Kearns. The lease had started nearly 3 years earlier. In that apartment, detectives found clothes, photographs, and a framed picture of a smiling woman with dark hair, the the same Melissa Winters from the overdose file. So began the unraveling of the pastor with two lives. Behind his Sunday sermons and his soft Southern drawl, Reverend Keller had been living a double existence. One life in Ashwood, devoted husband, father, spiritual leader. Another life, just 100 miles away, where he was David, a traveling insurance consultant with no mention of God, no wife, and no congregation. When the press got wind of it, the story exploded. Local news vans parked outside the church. Congregants wept on camera. The sheriff tried to control the narrative. "No evidence of foul play," he repeated, but the county courthouse buzzed with whispers of fraud, infidelity, and worse. Miriam refused to believe it. "Daniel wouldn't do that," she said through tears. "He wasn't perfect, but he wasn't a liar." Still, the evidence was impossible to ignore. Financial records traced money from the church's outreach fund into an unregistered account in Fayetteville. Over $60,000 had vanished in 2 years. The Board of Elders quietly suspended her husband's salary, pending investigation, though the word embezzlement never made the bulletin. That winter, the creek froze over. Snow swallowed the roads, and the town of Ashwood tried to move on. But the case refused to die. It was a hunter who found him, or what was left of him. Late February, a mile beyond the original crash site, wedged under a fallen log, the body of Daniel Keller surfaced when the thaw came. The coroner's report listed probable drowning, but inconsistencies raised eyebrows. There were bruises around his wrists, a fracture on the left temple, no sign of seatbelt injury consistent with a crash, and inside his jacket pocket, a motel key tagged Red Fern Inn, Room 12. That motel sat 50 miles east, near the interstate. When investigators drove there, the manager recognized Keller immediately. "Yeah, he'd been coming for years," he said. "Always alone. Paid cash. Sometimes had a woman with him. Dark hair, quiet. Thought they were married." The police retrieved the room's logbooks and surveillance tapes, but the footage from that particular week, the week Keller vanished, was missing. The manager claimed the hard drive overwrote itself. Then, for reasons no one could explain, the sheriff's department sealed the motel evidence. The press called it a clerical backlog. Locals called it a cover-up. By spring, the official narrative hardened. Keller drowned after driving off the road, an accident following stress and confusion. Case closed. But some detectives didn't buy it, especially Deputy Claire Monahan, a young officer new to the department. She'd grown up in Ashwood, had attended Keller's youth sermons. Something about the scene, the bruises, the motel key, the erased footage, wouldn't let her sleep. And when an anonymous envelope landed on her desk one April morning, postmarked from Fayetteville, she realized the story wasn't over. Inside was a single photograph. Daniel Keller standing outside the Red Fern Inn, not months ago, but just 2 days before he disappeared, with his arm around a woman who wasn't Melissa Winters. Stamped on the back were 5 words in shaky ink: "You buried the wrong body." Deputy Claire Monahan stared at the photograph under the flickering office light. It was old school, printed on glossy paper, like something out of a Kodak envelope from the 90s. The date scribbled on the back, November 3rd, was 2 days before Reverend Keller's car went into Miller Creek. The man in the photo was unmistakable. Daniel Keller, or rather David Kearns, wearing the same corduroy jacket seen in his church portraits. His arm was draped loosely around a woman with auburn hair, maybe mid-30s, faint scar above her lip. Behind them, the faded sign of the Red Fern Inn sagged on its hinges. Claire slid the photo into an evidence bag and looked around the station. The sheriff, Don Latham, sat in his office talking low into the phone. Through the glass, his expression didn't change when she knocked. He just pointed at the stack of paperwork on his desk. The unspoken message clear. "We're done with the Keller case. Let it go." But Claire couldn't. The bruises on Keller's wrists, the missing motel footage, the money trail that led nowhere, and now this photograph. None of it lined up with an accident. Something was off, and someone wanted her to see it. That night, after her shift, she drove the long stretch east to the Red Fern Inn. The road cut through farmlands that looked like abandoned postcards, rusted silos, sagging barns, the kind of place where even the wind sounded suspicious. When she pulled into the gravel lot, the neon sign buzzed faintly, flickering between red and fern. The clerk at the counter, a man in his 60s with nicotine-stained fingers, looked up from a radio. "Looking for a room?" he asked. "Looking for answers," she said, flashing her badge. He sighed. "Still about that preacher?" She nodded. He tapped his cigarette against the ashtray. "Told the cops everything I knew. Man was here plenty. Always alone at first, then later, sometimes with company." "Same woman every time?" The man hesitated. "No, ma'am. 2 women. Different years. One was dark-haired, quiet, didn't talk much. The other came later. Red hair, real sharp tongue. Stayed longer. Seemed like she ran things more than he did." Claire felt her pulse tick up. "Do you know her name?" He shook his head. "But she drove a green Chevy Impala. Arkansas plates. Used to sit right out there by the vending machine." Claire thanked him, left her card, and asked to see the guest logs. The oldest ones were handwritten, entries fading under years of spilled coffee and cigarette burns. Keller had checked in under David Kearns dozens of times, but one entry stood out. November 3rd, room 12, D. Kearns. Guest, A. Rayburn. That was the name that had never come up before. The next morning, she ran the name through state records. Angela Rayburn, 35, lived in Little Rock, worked as a real estate agent, divorced. No criminal record. But what caught her eye was an old address linked to Benton County, the same area where Melissa Winters had died years earlier. Claire picked up the phone and called the Benton County Coroner's office. "This is Deputy Monahan from Grant County," she said. "I'm looking for information on a case from 6 years back. Melissa Winters, ruled overdose. I need to know who signed off on the autopsy." After a long pause, the clerk replied, "That'd be Dr. Royce Weller. Retired now. Lives out near Springdale, I think. Could you send me a copy of that report?" "Sure, but you know that case was closed, right?" "Yeah," Claire said quietly. So was Keller's. By the time the file came through, she'd already started connecting dots. Melissa Winters had been 27 when she died. Waitress, single mother, known around church circles in Benton County. The autopsy listed her death as acute barbiturate toxicity, but the toxicology report was incomplete. The coroner's notes mentioned unexplained bruising along the jawline. No follow-up, no photographs. Claire drove to Springdale that weekend and found Dr. Weller in a modest ranch house tucked behind an overgrown hedge. He answered the door in a flannel shirt, eyes sharp behind thick glasses. "Miss, I've been retired 10 years, he said. "If this is about malpractice, it's about Melissa Winters," she interrupted. "And Reverend Daniel Keller." That name froze him mid-motion. He glanced down the hallway, as if checking for unseen listeners. "I remember her," he said slowly. "Pretty girl, it never sat. Right with me." "What do you mean?" He motioned for her to follow him inside. The living room smelled of old coffee and books. There was pressure from the county back then to close it fast. The sheriff said it was a suicide. I didn't think so. Her injuries weren't consistent. Looked like a struggle to me. "Did you report that?" He smiled bitterly. "You don't report things like that out here. Not if you want to keep your job." "Why would they cover it up?" "Because of who she was involved with." Claire's stomach tightened. "The pastor?" Weller nodded. "I saw him at the hospital that night. Said he'd found her body behind the diner. Claimed he was counseling her. But the look in his eyes, it wasn't grief." He took a sip of water, hands trembling slightly. "You want my opinion? That man was hiding something long before anyone knew." Back in Ashwood, Claire requested the old case file from archives and discovered half of it missing, evidence forms unsigned, photographs unlogged. Someone had sanitized the record years ago, but one surviving note from the original investigator caught her attention. Subject K maintains 2 identities. Connection to Winters confirmed. Watch for Rayburn alias. Rayburn. The name from the motel ledger. That night, Claire sat in her car outside the church parking lot, watching the light flicker in the office window. Miriam Keller still lived there, refusing to leave the parsonage. The congregation had splintered, some loyal, some ashamed. Claire approached the house just as Miriam opened the door. "Deputy Monahan," Miriam said softly, clutching her cardigan. "You're still working on Daniel's case?" "Yes, ma'am. I need to ask about a woman. Angela Rayburn. Does that name mean anything to you?" Miriam's expression hardened, something between fear and fury. "Why are you doing this?" "I think your husband was involved with her before he died." Her lips quivered. "You think I don't know?" she whispered. "You think I didn't find the emails, the pictures? I begged him to end it. He promised me he had. Then 2 days later, he was gone." Claire swallowed. "Did you ever meet her?" "No, but she called me once, after the funeral." Miriam's voice dropped to a near whisper. "She said Daniel wasn't who I thought he was, that the real danger hadn't even begun." Claire returned to her cruiser and replayed those words. The real danger hadn't begun. Whoever Angela Rayburn was, she wasn't done. The next morning, a report landed on Claire's desk. Abandoned vehicle, green Chevy Impala, found off Highway 412. The plates matched the motel clerk's description. Inside the car was a handbag, lipstick, and a driver's license. Angela Rayburn. No sign of her. And in the glove compartment, tucked inside an envelope, another photograph, the same as before, Keller and Rayburn outside, the motel. But this time, someone had drawn a red circle around his wrist. Faint marks visible beneath his watch. Bruises identical to those in the coroner's report. On the back, another message. He wasn't the only one with secrets. By summer, the whispers started again. Townsfolk swore they'd seen Keller's car driving near the back roads at night, headlights cutting through fog like a ghost. Miriam stopped coming to Sunday service. Someone spray-painted "Thief in the Pulpit" across the church sign. Deputy Monahan worked alone, piecing together a trail no one else wanted to touch. But the harder she pulled, the faster the truth slipped away. Buried under old loyalties, sealed files, and a silence older than the town itself. Then, one morning, a call came in from the next county over. A body had been found in a burned-out farmhouse near the edge of the state line. Dental records confirmed it. Angela Rayburn. But the sheriff there wasn't interested in sharing details. "Accidental fire," he said. "End of story." Except one small detail made that impossible. Her wrists were bound, and among the ashes, investigators found a wedding ring engraved with initials. DK and AR, forever in faith. The farmhouse sat at the edge of nowhere, half collapsed under the weight of smoke and years. Deputy Monahan parked at the yellow tape and stood there for a long minute, breathing the smell of wet ash and burnt pine. The county line ran just past the fence, meaning jurisdiction was a problem, and the locals already made it clear they wanted her gone. She flashed her badge anyway. The deputy guarding the perimeter, a broad man with mud up his boots, shook his head. "Grant County," he said. "This ain't your scene." "It might be connected to one of ours," Claire replied, handing him a copy of the Keller photo. "Recognize either of them?" He looked at it, exhaled. "That woman's the victim, yeah. But this other guy, who is he?" "Her husband," Claire said quietly. "At least one of them." He frowned. "You sure about that? Because there's a marriage certificate in our evidence bin. Says otherwise." "What name?" "David Kearns." The fake identity again. Keller's second life. Inside the ruins, fire investigators sifted through what was left of the living room. A single chair frame, melted picture glass, scorched Bible pages fused together like tar. Claire crouched near the hearth, where a patch of carpet had somehow avoided the worst of the fire. She noticed faint scratches in the wood beneath, not random burns, but letters carved deep by a sharp object. 3 initials: ARK, Angela Rayburn Keller. Whoever she was at the end, she'd taken his name. When Claire asked about the fire's cause, the local coroner muttered something about electrical faults. But she saw the accelerant traces in the lab report. Kerosene along the baseboards. The fire hadn't started by accident. It had been built. The body was found near the hallway, hands bound, duct tape residue across the mouth. Cause of death: smoke inhalation. But she'd been alive when the fire began. That much was certain. Someone had wanted her silent, and they'd almost succeeded. Back in Ashwood, the news spread fast. The other woman, the one they said Keller cheated with, found dead. For a few days, it was the only thing anyone talked about. Then, like everything else in that town, it faded under the weight of convenience. But not for Miriam Keller. When Claire visited her again, she found Miriam sitting in the kitchen with a cup of untouched coffee, eyes swollen. "She didn't deserve that," Miriam whispered. "Whatever she did with him, no one deserves that." Claire hesitated. "You knew she was dead?" "She called me the night before the fire." Claire froze. "What did she say?" "She said she'd found something Daniel left behind. Something buried out near Miller Creek, near where they found his car. Said it would clear her name and destroy the rest. I told her not to go. She laughed and said it was already too late." "Did she say what it was?" "No." Miriam's eyes drifted to the window. "But she sounded scared." That night, Claire returned to Miller Creek. The air was damp, heavy with the smell of mud and cedar. She parked near the bridge where the Crown Vic had been pulled from the water months earlier. Her flashlight swept the banks until it caught something half buried, a plastic container wedged under a rock ledge. Inside were three things: a flash drive, a folded letter, and a church donation ledger stamped First Hope Baptist, Ashwood. The letter was addressed simply, "To whoever still believes. If you're reading this, I'm gone. He told me no one would ever find the truth, that it would die with him. But secrets rot, and I can't live with the smell anymore. I loved him. God help me, I did. But Daniel wasn't the man everyone thought. He didn't just have 2 lives. He had 2 deaths waiting for him." The flash drive contained scanned documents, bank transfers, correspondence, and one email thread that made Claire's stomach drop. It was between Keller and a contact labeled Deacon 47. Keller: "Funds moved. Need to finalize before she talks." Deacon 47: "Then she won't talk." Keller: "You don't understand. She knows about Winters. She knows everything." Deacon 47: "Then we make sure history repeats." The last message was time-stamped the night before Keller's disappearance. Claire brought it to Sheriff Latham the next morning. He barely looked at it before sliding the folder back across his desk. "You've gone far enough," he said. "Sir, this is proof of conspiracy, financial fraud, possibly 2 murders." He rubbed his temples. "You're making enemies you can't see. You think a small-town pastor pulled this off alone? Look around Monaghan. Half the county was laundering money through that church." She stared at him, stunned. "And you're covering for them? I'm keeping this county from tearing itself apart. That's what I'm doing. By burying the truth." He stood, face pale. "You'll drop this. That's an order." But she didn't. Instead, she made copies of everything and drove 3 hours north to meet with a retired FBI agent she'd found through a contact, a man named Thomas Reeve. He'd worked organized crime out of Little Rock in the early 2000s, before vanishing from the force under unexplained circumstances. They met at a diner off Route 65. He was older now, white beard, wearing a ball cap that said, "Arkansas Bass Masters." She slid the files across the table. "What do you see?" He thumbed through them in silence, then nodded slowly. "Church laundering, classic setup. Non-profit donations funneled through shell accounts, usually for land grabs, development deals, sometimes narcotics." "Narcotics?" Claire frowned. "Keller." Reeve leaned closer. "Don't look at Keller. Look at who was giving him the money. That's where your problem starts." He pointed to a bank statement. Multiple donations from a company called Eden Agricultural Supplies, a front headquartered 30 miles away. Reeve smiled grimly. "I raided those guys 20 years ago. Same family runs it. You want to know who your Deacon 47 is? I'd bet it's one of them." Claire went home with her mind spinning. If the Eden Company had ties to the church and Keller had been moving money for them, maybe his second identity wasn't about infidelity at all. Maybe it was logistics. Maybe he'd been laundering money between 2 counties under the guise of pastoral outreach. But then, what about the murders? Melissa Winters, Angela Rayburn, 2 women linked to Keller, 2 dead. If the same network silenced Angela after she threatened to expose them, maybe Keller's accident was no accident either, and maybe his own church had helped bury it. That night, Claire sat alone in her apartment, replaying the flash drive files. One audio clip caught her attention, a voicemail labeled unknown. She hit play, a man's voice, calm and unhurried. Daniel, you should have listened. You think faith protects you? You think she can save you? When the tide turns, even God stops answering. Click. The timestamp, 10:32 p.m., the night of Keller's disappearance. 2 days later, Claire woke to find her tires slashed, her mailbox ripped off its post, and in her email inbox, an anonymous message. "You're digging in the wrong grave." She knew then it wasn't just about Keller anymore. Someone in Ashwood, someone still preaching, still shaking hands on Sunday mornings, was protecting the lie he died for. When she returned to the sheriff's office, her desk was empty, files gone, computer wiped, Latham's door locked. So she drove to the one place no one would follow, the old church basement, sealed since the investigation began. The lock was rusted, easy to break. Inside, the air was thick with mold and old hymns. Boxes of donation records lined the wall, all stamped First Hope Baptist, confidential. She opened one at random and froze. Inside were stacks of blank birth certificates, false IDs, and immigration papers. Behind the pulpit, faith had been funding something far worse than infidelity. That's when she heard the footsteps behind her. Slow, deliberate, echoing off stone. "Didn't I tell you to stop, deputy?" a voice said softly. It was Sheriff Latham. Only this time, he wasn't alone. The beam of Claire's flashlight caught the sheriff's face first, sweat glistening under the brim of his hat, his service pistol drawn but lowered, not quite ready to shoot. Behind him, 2 men she didn't recognize stepped into the dim light. One wore work boots and a church volunteer jacket. The other had the watchful calm of someone used to being obeyed. His suit was too clean for this town. "Evening, deputy," Sheriff Latham said. "You shouldn't be here." Claire stood her ground, hand near her holster. "You killed him," she said quietly. "Didn't you?" The sheriff's jaw flexed. "Watch your words." "I've seen the ledgers, the IDs, the flash drive. Keller was running money through this church for someone. But when he tried to stop, you made sure he disappeared. And when his mistress tried to talk, she burned." The man in the suit stepped forward. "We all play our part, Miss Monahan," he said, voice smooth as polished oak. "Pastor Keller forgot his. That's all." "Who the hell are you?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Just another believer." The volunteer in the back shifted, revealing the glint of a revolver. Claire's heart thudded. The air in the basement smelled of dust and gasoline. Faint, but unmistakable. She scanned the floor. A half-empty gas can sat near the stairs. They'd been here before. They'd burned evidence before. "Let me guess," she said, forcing her voice steady. "The money wasn't for the church. It was for Eden Agricultural Supplies." The man in the suit raised an eyebrow. "You've done your homework." "I met someone who used to work that case," she said. "Said you were laundering cartel funds through rural parishes. You used Keller's ministry as a front." He smiled again, softer this time. "You really think the Lord only works on Sundays?" Latham shifted his weight, uneasy. "This isn't what you think," he muttered. "No, Don," Claire said. "It's exactly what I think. You covered for them. You ruled Keller's death an accident. You told the press to back off. You let 2 women die because it kept the lights on." The sheriff's gun wavered. "You don't know what you're doing, Claire. You blow this open, the state'll gut the whole county. The feds will seize the land, the church, the farms, everything. Half this town will lose what little they've got left. You think this is about protecting them? She shot back. You're protecting yourself. The man in the suit sighed. She's not going to stop, Sheriff. You know what has to be done. That was the moment Claire realized the decision wasn't really the sheriff's to make. It hadn't been for a long time. He lowered his head. I'm sorry, Claire. He raised the gun, but he hesitated, just long enough for her to flick her flashlight into his eyes and dive behind a stack of records. The shot cracked through the basement, echoing like thunder. Dust exploded from the shelves. She crawled toward the back, heart slamming, knowing she had seconds before the next round. Another shot, closer. She rolled behind an old baptismal tank, drew her weapon, and fired twice toward the shadows. One of the men went down with a grunt. The man in the suit barked, "Get her!" She bolted up the stairs, taking them 3 at a time, hearing boots pound after her. The heavy door at the top jammed halfway. She slammed her shoulder into it, once, twice, until it gave. Cold night air hit her face. She ran into the churchyard, slipped on wet gravel, and turned toward her cruiser. Then she saw it. The steeple light was on, glowing faintly through the fog. Someone was up there. She climbed the spiral stairs 2 at a time, pistol in hand, every creak of the old wood hamantiwat echoing in her chest. At the top, in the narrow bell tower, she found a figure sitting in the corner. An older woman, clutching something to her chest. "Miriam," Claire breathed. The pastor's widow looked fragile in the half-light, her face pale, her eyes distant. "I didn't want it to end like this," she whispered. "But they said if I didn't help them, they'd hurt my son." Claire's voice softened. "You helped them cover it up?" Miriam nodded, tears streaming. "Daniel got in too deep. At first it was just donations, partnerships, money for missions. But when he found out where it really came from, he wanted out. He was going to go to the police. Then what happened?" "They came that night," Miriam said, staring at the floorboards. "Don and those men. Said Daniel had stolen from them. Said if I didn't tell the deputies he'd been depressed, they'd burn our house down. They made me say he was overworked. They made me smile at the funeral." Claire knelt beside her. "Miriam, listen to me. You're not safe here. We have to go." Miriam shook her head and opened her hands. She was holding a USB stick, identical to the one Claire had found by the creek. "He made 2 copies," Miriam whispered. "He told me to hide this if anything happened to him. Said it would prove everything." Down below, headlights cut through the fog, trucks pulling up to the church. The men were coming. "Miriam," Claire said, rising. "We have to move. Now." The woman hesitated, glancing once at the cross on the wall. "He used to say the truth would set us free," she murmured. "He didn't say what it would cost." Before Claire could stop her, Miriam shoved the USB into Claire's hand and pushed her toward the stairwell. "Go! Miriam, go!" The first Molotov hit the chapel window as Claire reached the second landing. Fire spread fast. Old wood and dry hymnals turned the sanctuary into a furnace. She covered her mouth with her sleeve, stumbled through the smoke, and burst into the night. Behind her, flames swallowed the church in seconds. By the time she reached her cruiser, the roof had collapsed. The steeple bell fell and cracked open the nave. She screamed Miriam's name, but got nothing back except the roar of fire and the faint echo of distant sirens. 2 days later, federal agents swarmed Ashwood. The evidence from the second USB drive exposed everything. The shell companies, the donations, the bribes. Eden Agricultural was just the surface. Beneath it ran a web of real estate fraud, drug distribution, and tax evasion stretching across 4 counties. The Department of Justice moved fast. Sheriff Latham was arrested in his home that morning, still in uniform. The man in the suit, identified as Mark Halloran, former CFO of Eden, vanished before they could find him. His house was empty. His accounts cleared. The remains recovered from the church ruins included 2 men, one of the shooters, and partial remains confirmed as Miriam Keller. She'd stayed behind when the roof came down. In the FBI report, they called her a cooperative informant. Months passed. The case made national headlines for a week, then disappeared like all small-town scandals do, swallowed by the next one. First Hope Baptist never rebuilt. The land was fenced off, the burned cross still standing like a warning. Deputy Claire Monahan left the department the following spring. No ceremony, no farewell. She moved to Fayetteville, took a job teaching criminal investigations at the academy. The agents had offered her a commendation for exceptional persistence, but she never collected it. One evening, she sat on her porch with a cup of coffee, scrolling through old case files on her laptop. There was one image she kept returning to, the first photograph, the one mailed to her with the message, "You buried the wrong body." She zoomed in on Keller's face, the smile, the tilt of his head. The more she looked, the more it unsettled her. There was something different about him in that photo, not just happiness, almost defiance. Then she noticed it. The ring on his hand, not the same wedding band found at the farmhouse, a different one, engraved with the letters RM, not Reverend Keller, not Angela Rayburn, RM. Initials that matched one person only, Reverend Miriam. She set the laptop down, heart racing. Had Keller really been dead that night in Miller Creek? Or had the body pulled from the water, the one identified by dental records and a convenient coroner's note, belonged to someone else entirely? The letter in the creek, the missing footage, the double graves, they all pointed to one impossible question that still haunted her. Who was the man they buried in the pastor's place? Claire closed the laptop and looked toward the dark horizon beyond her porch. Somewhere out there, beneath the same southern stars, maybe a man named David Kearns was still alive. Another alias, another church, another congregation, none the wiser. The breeze shifted, carrying the faint scent of rain and smoke. And for the first time in months, she thought she heard it. The slow, hollow toll of a church bell, ringing from somewhere far off, deep in the woods. If you liked this story, please subscribe to the channel for more true crime mysteries.